here I am at the pinnacle of my career. Like it doesn't get any higher than this in business. And to be honest, I wanted to run. It was like an epiphany. As I looked around the table, I saw people who I didn't want to emulate. Like most of them looked unhealthy. I knew a lot of them were unhappy, had broken family relationships, and these were not my peeps. It was a weird feeling because here I was like at, probably the high water mark in terms of my ascent of the corporate ladder, and all I wanted to do was run. And the crazy part is that's sort of what I did. So within a few weeks of that meeting, I hit the reset button. A lot of people thought I was crazy at the time. I questioned my own sanity. But really, what it boils down to, Nate, is what I had achieved was a definition of success that was probably great for someone else, but not for me. It was not my definition of success. And so at the age of 47, I sort of rebooted and rebuilt life on my terms.
Welcome back to Horizons podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. I'm your host, Nate Desmond, and today I'm sitting down with Kevin Dahlstrom. Kevin is a contrarian marketing leader who, after reaching the pinnacle of corporate success as a 3-time public company CMO, actually rebooted his entire life at the age of 47, moved from Dallas to Boulder to pursue rock climbing and a more intentional lifestyle of pursuing meaningful work integrated within life. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nate, thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I would love to dive quickly into that moment that changed your life. And specifically, I believe it was a meeting with Masa Son of SoftBank that prompted you to completely reboot. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So, I'm kind of a classic story. Look, I'm a Gen Xer and we are notorious for being grinders, right? So Gen X, we don't question things. We put our heads down and we just go. And so, when I came out of college in the mid 90s, I didn't really even know that there was such a thing as like choosing a path you're passionate about. I was optimizing for like, what's the best job I can get and how quickly can I work my way to the top of the ladder? And so I started my career in management consulting and pretty quickly made my way into marketing. I landed my first CMO job for a startup back in 2005. I was lucky in that my first job was a home run. We took the business from 5 million in revenue to 500 million in revenue, did an IPO. So like, it was a great start to the career. And, based on that success, I love being a CMO. I think it's the best job in any company, big or small. And so I kind of parlayed that. And as you said, I've been a public company CMO 3 times, a founder another 5 times, where I sort of was marketing focused as well. And, long story short, I did exactly what I set out to do. I worked my way to the top of the corporate ladder. And what you mentioned is, in my case, there was sort of a moment in time epiphany that happened. So at the time, this was back in 2017, I was the CMO of a multi-billion-dollar public company. We were in the midst of selling the company, and I had this incredible meeting with Masa Son, who, if you don't know who Masa Son is, he's the legendary multi-billionaire CEO of SoftBank, which is this huge Japanese conglomerate. At the time, SoftBank had launched this new thing called the Vision Fund, which was a $100 billion private equity fund, the largest private equity fund that's ever existed. They were interested in buying our company. We went out to California for this crazy meeting at his house. A little side note, we met at Masa's house, and he had just bought this house in Riverside, California for $150 million. It's the
Wow.
largest, at the time at least, it was the highest price ever paid for a residence in the US. And the home was just as crazy as you might imagine. We're greeted at the door by servants. They ask us our shoe size. They give us Burberry slippers to wear inside the house. We have the meeting in Masa's dining room, which is this huge ornate place. And his staff is seated on one side of the table. My staff's on the other. Here I am at the pinnacle of my career. Like it doesn't get any higher than this in business. And to be honest, my feeling was I wanted to run. It was like an epiphany. As I looked around the table, I saw people who I didn't want to emulate. Like most of them looked unhealthy. I knew a lot of them were unhappy, had broken family relationships, and these were not my peeps. And so it was a weird feeling because here I was like at, probably the point that marked the high water mark in terms of my ascent of the corporate ladder. And all I wanted to do was run. And the crazy part is that's sort of what I did. So within a few weeks of that meeting, I hit the reset button. I quit that job. I moved my family from Dallas, Texas to Boulder, Colorado, where we live now. And I haven't looked back since. And, like a lot of people thought I was crazy at the time. I questioned my own sanity. But really, what it boils down to, Nate, is what I had achieved was a definition of success that was probably great for someone else, but not for me. It was not my definition of success. And so at the age of 47, I sort of rebooted and rebuilt life on my terms.
It's incredible. What were the first few weeks like after you sort of gave up everything and moved into a new lifestyle that you actually wanted? Because that can be a scary
Yeah.
moment of sometimes regret, even.
Right. Well, to say I wasn't scared would be incorrect because it was terrifying. Any big change is terrifying, but also everything that we want is on the other side of fear. And look, I mean, to be fair, I was in a financial position where I was able to pull the plug and do things. I'd worked really hard for a long time to be in that position, to have that privilege, but it was still scary, right? Because you're casting off into the unknown. To be honest, the biggest catalyst for the change and the thing that I was running to was outdoor lifestyle. So years before this reboot, I had discovered rock climbing and it clicked for me immediately. I became really passionate about it. It kind of grew like a virus. It became a bigger and bigger part of my life. And what it did is it exposed me to an entirely different world where your worth wasn't measured by how much money you had or what your title was. And these were my peeps. These were the people I connected with. So ultimately, that really was the catalyst for my reboot. And so when I moved to Boulder, the first thing was I just wanted to win back some time. Like, I was 47 years old. I wasn't exactly young. And so I wanted to spend a lot of time rock climbing and outdoors with my family. And that's exactly what I did. But what I did find is that wasn't enough. I believe human beings need to work. We need to be doing challenging things. We need to have skin in the game. And so pretty quickly, I came back and tried to find like some sort of balance between doing work that's challenging and engaging, but doing it on my terms. But also, I think what I realized is success for me isn't a dollar amount, it's control of my time. And so, fast forward to today, so we moved in 2018. So it's been 7 years. And that's how I live today is my calendar is something I control. I still am involved in a lot of work projects. I work really hard, but I do it on my terms, on my time, and I build my calendar each week around the weather.
I love that. How, if you were to make this decision earlier in your career, because you mentioned like being financially stable is very helpful in making such a transition. If you were to do this in your early 20s, how would you make sure that you are still building your career while living the lifestyle that you want?
Yeah. So I think the key to all of this, I'll take a little bit of a step back and broaden your question a bit. I think the key to all of this and kind of the thing I wish I had known when I was much younger was start with the end in mind. So I have this exercise that I call the ideal end state. And it's something I developed out of necessity when I was thinking about like, what do I want my future to look like? And the exercise is actually incredibly simple, but powerfully powerful. What you do is you get out a piece of paper or like the notes app on your iPhone, and literally you just bullet out what you would like if you had no constraints, what your daily life would look like. And to be clear, it's not a list of achievements. So it's not like a bucket list, it's more of like a state of being. What would that look like? So on my list is things like get lots of sunshine every day, control 80% of my schedule, always have a creative project going with my kids. There's like 20 items on my list. I actually posted it on X. And that exercise is super powerful because what it does is it provides a North Star. And so what you can do is you can use that as a litmus test for everything that you do, right? So the goal is to align all of your actions today with your end state, your ideal end state, the end state you're trying to work toward. And you should be doing things that move you closer and do not do things that move you further. It sounds so simple, yet most people haven't gone through this exercise. It's really important to be very specific. And there's power in writing this thing down. The second thing that most people realize when they go through that exercise is that they look at their end state and they say, well, gosh, I thought I needed all this money to be free. And actually, most of the things on my ideal end state lifestyle don't require a lot of money. It requires control of my time. Right. And so, even if you're young and understanding that your end state can change over time, that's fine. And your end state may take years or decades to achieve, but you'll never get there if you don't know what the destination is. And that was kind of my errors. Like, I just sort of cast off and put my head down and went in the direction society told me to. And it turns out that wasn't exactly what I wanted.
Yes, it's so easy to do that, isn't it? To have someone else's vision, run at it, and then get there and realize, like, oh, actually, I don't really want to be there.
Well, we're bombarded with all these messages from society. I mean, social media is great at that, right? It's like this idea of, what success looks like. And for most people, that's actually not what they really want.
And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. And I'm curious to go deeper into this element of if I'm like early 20s, early 30s, which I am early 30s, and I want to both achieve this ideal end state of control over my time, but also do really meaningful work in a career. Do you think it's possible to both achieve the things you've achieved, 3 times CMO, you renamed a public company, and have this in state? And I wonder, is maybe the key, something I've seen in your last 7 years, is that you've done periods of deep work where you've gone really deep into a company and led it. And I assume that means less rock climbing for a period of time. And then you've gone back to this more ideal life. Is it an alternation between super intense work and more lifestyle work?
I would say more than alternating, think of it more like a sliding scale. So, right, when you're in your 20s and you're just getting started, look, you don't have any control. The idea that you would control your calendar is ludicrous. You just got to do what you got to do to get by, to pay the bills, to support your family. So you have very little control. But rather than thinking about control as like a point in time when all of a sudden, like the traditional retirement model says, like grind away in a job for 40 years. And then when you're like 65, suddenly one day you start doing nothing. Well, that doesn't sound very appealing. Think of it more like a sliding scale where you start off in your 20s, you have zero control. But as you gain skills, you build a little bit of wealth, slowly start gaining control. Where most people get off track is they aren't deliberate about that. And so they just sort of let their career dominate their life forever. If you're deliberate about it, which the ideal end state exercise helps with, think of it as like in your 20s, you control like 5% of your life. In your 30s, it's 20%. In your 40s, it's 50%. In your 50s, I'm 54 right now, and I control most of it, right? And that I still work, like you talk about deep work. I do work on my projects 7 days a week, and I like to call it deep work. But again, it makes all the difference in the world when you can do it on your terms. So like if you can do it when you want to and how you want to, and like most marketers, I'm creatively wired. And so it's extra important for me because marketers don't work a linear schedule, right? We don't get inspiration in a linear way. It's like fits and spurts. And for example, I do my best work in the morning right after I've had my coffee. And so I'll do a deep work block in the morning and then or I won't if I'm not feeling inspired. And then I'll do something else the rest of the day. But again, it's like this is a privilege that's earned, but the key is you have to be deliberate about it from day one.
That makes a lot of sense. So know your ideal end state, even if you cannot live it right now, and work toward that. Have that as your North Star.
Yeah, so like when I show people my ideal end state, there's like 30 items on it and like 26 of them are checked off. So I still have 4 left to go. And when you're in your 20s, you might have 1 checked off out of 30, right? So this is not a birthright to live your ideal life. It's something you earn over time. And I'm joking because like I literally will have young people come to me sometime, guys in their 20s, and say, how do I get a life like yours? And I say, oh, it's really, really easy. It just takes 30 years of consistent hard work and discipline.
Yes. And in those 30 years, what would you say are the like one or two key skills? Because you've been CMO at multiple public companies,
Yep.
you've done things most people have not done. What are
Yep.
the one or two key skills that actually have been most important to your success in those roles?
Yeah, well, I think number one, I'd say is pursue a career where you have a natural advantage, right? So, like, well, I'm a great example because my education was in engineering, and the only reason I went into engineering is because had really high test scores in math, and I was told that people who are good at math should be engineers because that's how you make the most money. Now, I did, and by the way, graduated with high honors in engineering from university, never worked a day as an engineer because fortunately, when I interned as an engineer at a big company in college, I was like, oh, this is what engineers do. And, no shade to engineers, but that's not what I want to do with my life. And so I started steering myself more toward what things I was more naturally passionate about. I've always been an idea guy. And so I noticed that when I was in school and even early in my career, there were guys who were just like quantitatively faster and better at engineering and math than I was. But I always had better ideas. That was my secret weapon. And so I consciously steered myself into a field where I had a natural advantage. I was born to be a CMO because I feel very comfortable in that role. I'm very comfortable working with a blank slate. That makes most people have a nervous breakdown. But I love creating something from nothing. The second thing that's really always been a huge advantage to me is I've always been very results focused. So, I've always focused on the output, not the input. And that's what, if you want to get the attention of a CEO or you're working your way up a company, you want to get the attention of like your boss or your boss's boss or the VP or whatever, deliver results. Like I've always been laser focused on like, okay, what's the result we're trying to achieve here? And then the tactics can follow and the strategies can follow from there. I think a lot of people just sort of go through the motions and do what they're asked, which is, nothing wrong with that. I always wanted to know why. Like, why are we trying to do this? What result are we trying to achieve? Because if I can move the needle for the company, that's going to help the company and it's going to make me look really good. And honestly, the few pivotal moments in my career where I've really sprung forward big time, like I mentioned, my first CMO gig, we achieved some incredible results. That was it. Like I came in and I knew that the job in that particular company, we needed to scale our customer base. And so that's all I focused on was scaling the customer base. I didn't focus a lot on brand. Later in my career, I came into a company or a couple companies where it was a brand play. So I didn't focus at all on customer acquisition. I tried to turn the brand around.
Zooming in on that second point, results focus. When you're looking at really any mid-career, you're thinking about how do you scale your impact? And often that's through hiring people and managing people. But it's very hard to find people who have that same focus because they're often going off and doing their own CMO job or something similar. How have you found the right people on your team who share that vision of results focus? And is it more finding the right people or is it more empowering and inspiring people to become that person?
I think it's both. And look, we could do a whole hour long podcast on hiring because it's something I'm passionate about. But you're right. I mean, as a CMO, especially in a larger company, you're only as good as your people, right? I can have big ideas, but if I can't execute them, I'm dead in the water. And so I have a big belief in general that how you do anything is how you do everything. And so when I hire, I actually don't look, it's popular to say today 15, 20 years ago, this wasn't very popular. Like, I don't look at the resume that closely. I actually don't care a whole lot about, like those are table stakes. Like, you wouldn't be in an interview with me unless you had the basic qualifications and you had some impressive things on your resume. I'm trying to understand who you are as a person. And I found that the most powerful way to do that is by asking about their personal life, digging into their personal life. Again, how you do anything is how you do everything. I find that people that are high performers tend to be high performers in all aspects of life. And the reason it's powerful to look at their personal life is because it's easier to basically fake accomplishments in a career, especially if you've been attached to a big brand. Like I know you've worked at some big brand companies. And like, look, if you were at Google during the rocket ship era, I mean, rising tide floats all boats. I mean, that's a great thing to have on your resume. The question is, what did you do, right, to drive that growth? And so it's hard to ferret that out when you're looking at work accomplishments. But if you look at someone's personal life, it's them, right? They wouldn't have accomplished things unless they did it themselves. And so I'll dig into like their habits and their patterns in their personal life. And then so you get someone on board who is a high achiever, who doesn't like to lose. And then there is a training, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of my direct reports. And actually, I will tell you, Nate, this if you asked me like what's the single proudest achievement in your career, it wouldn't be like ringing the bell on Wall Street or making money. It's the fact that essentially 100% of my direct reports have gone on to be C-level or founders on their own. And a lot of them have had way more success in terms of financial measures than I've had. And I'm super proud of that. In fact, 2 days ago, one of the people I mentored, it's a woman I mentored, was the company she's a C-level at sold for $9.4 billion. And it makes me really proud to know that, you know, she landed that C-level job at that company in large part because I helped her. I played a role in that.
That is really exciting to see people grow and thrive because of, in part, something that you've been able to do. That's a big moment.
Yep. Yeah. So I think it's about, finding people who are hard driving winners and then providing them the tools and the freedom to thrive.
Yeah, that's fair. It reminds me of something that I found helpful in performance reviews, and I think it would apply to interviewing as well. There are really three questions that people are trying to answer when they evaluate my performance or someone's performance. First of it's what has this person done? And not just to your point, what did the company do while they were there, but what did this person do? Second is what was the impact? Did this actually have an impact, or was it just a thing that they did that didn't matter? And then the last one, which is crucial, is do I believe them? Is this truly something that they did and had this impact, or are they claiming someone else's results?
Yep. And then, one other aspect that I always add, and it's just really more of a personal thing, is I hire people who I look forward to working with, right? So, like, there are high performers who are just not a personality fit for the company or for me for whatever reason. And I weight that just as much because, look, you're in the trenches together, you're spending a lot of time together, you need to communicate well. And so I look for people who are just, I always say that who are accretive to the culture, right? So they add some new dimension to the culture. And it can be something like bizarre. Like one time I was interviewing someone who was a candidate to be a head of customer service for one of my companies. And I asked her, what do you like to do in your spare time? And she just lit up and she said, oh, I'm a member of the 501st Stormtrooper Division. And I was like, well, what is that? She whipped out her phone and she showed me all these pictures where like there's this nationwide group of people who are huge Star Wars enthusiasts, and they dress up like stormtroopers and they march in formation in parades and they reenact the battles from Star. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. That was an immediate hire, insta hire. Like she brought energy, she brought something different to the table.
That is incredible. Okay, I want to go deeper on this interviewing piece. When you're asking people questions, you're trying to understand in their personal life, are they driven, high impact people? What sorts of questions do you ask?
Yeah, great one. I like to start vague and let them take the lead on that. So, the question I've asked in every interview for at least the past 15 years is very simple. It's what do you like to do when you're not working? And Nate, you'd be shocked at how many people struggle to answer that question. It seems like a really simple, harmless question. So right off the bat, if you like struggle to answer that question, that's a red flag. And on the other hand, I found that the people who end up being the best hires are the ones like are like, oh my God, where do I start? There's so many things I'm interested in. And sometimes you'll have people who like give you the generic answer, like, well, I like to watch movies, I like to hang out with my family. And yeah, we all like to hang out with our family. Tell me about you, right? And I don't care what it is, to the point about like the Star Wars fanatic. I don't care. You don't have to have the same interests as me, but are you an interesting, high energy person? And again, back to this idea of how you do anything is how you do everything. Like you're going to bring the same energy to work that you bring to dressing up as a stormtrooper, right? And
Yes.
so, but if by looking at your personal life, it's an incredible glimpse into how you operate.
Yes. And it reminds me of curiosity that so often in life, curiosity is a big driver. If you're motivated by curiosity, you can do a lot. And if you're just not a curious person, maybe you do just enjoy watching TV and maybe you will enjoy just doing whatever someone tells you at work and not driving into something new and really understanding the user and what the customer really wants.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And yeah, I've just found that those most people try to get at those traits by asking about work accomplishments. And I just find it to be much more effective to look at the other side of their life.
Yes. And when you have someone who's in your company, and maybe they're in your company because they were there before you were hired, how do you develop them into more of the type of player you want to see on your team?
Yeah. So my policy, the way I operate, the way I roll is I'm incredibly demanding, but I give people a lot of freedom in how they achieve. So I try to set a very clear set of expectations for what we're trying to build to. It's basically like the ideal end state, except for when I come into a company, I try to paint a very clear vision of what we're trying to build toward. I try to make it very clear to my direct reports what their role in it is in it, and then I'm, for the most part, hands off. I do tend to go deep on things that are extra important or that I personally am passionate about, like things like design, for example. But on a day to day basis, all of my direct reports would tell you I'm probably the most hands off boss they've ever had. But I am demanding, back to this idea of driving toward results. I set a very clear vision and I'm very demanding of results. And so I've found that when I come into a company and I don't have the ability to make hires, some people can adapt to that and some people can't. And it's really just more of a work style thing. It's very hard for someone who does not naturally fit into that work style. It's very hard for them to adapt. You either sort of like do enjoy that work style or you don't. For example, the type of person you mentioned who just likes kind of to be told what to do and they'll do that and nothing more. At least for a direct report of mine, that's usually not a fit.
Let's say you were to be hired into like CMO of Uber. How would you set the North Star and that vision for the company? And how do you communicate that to, let's say, the head of customer service?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it starts with I'm probably being hired for a reason. And typically it's one of two reasons. Like I've gone into CMO gigs where the brand was maybe a little bit tarnished and needed to be turned around. Or another situation would be like maybe it's a company like Uber. And I'm not saying Uber is this way, but where what got us here won't get us there. Like we've had a lot of success, but we really need to go to the next level.
Yeah.
And it all starts with that. Back to again to like the goals and results. It's like the CEO hired me for a reason. What is that reason? And then everything that I build is based on that. Let's say that we want to diverse, like Uber is known, I'm making this up. Uber is known for ride sharing. And of course, Uber does all these other things. We need to become a more diversified brand. And that's the mission that I'm hired to do. Well, then I'll create a vision around that, and then everything flows from that. The way I organize the teams, the objectives for the teams, and we'll measure those results.
And when you're coming in for a major change or even a complete change in direction for the company, how do you balance that we need to diversify with the longer term of we're still doing rideshare 20 years in the future and we should make sure that part of the business is stable?
Yeah, how do you keep from screwing up the cash cow, the golden goose? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a challenge, and it really depends on the specifics of the circumstance. It is possible. I mean, that's one of the challenges that big companies have is when you have huge success in one line of business, how do you diversify? How do you have a second act? And there's a reason that it's very rare actually for a company to have a second act that's as successful as their first.
Yeah. Yeah, the innovator's dilemma. Okay, I'm
That's exactly.
curious for someone who's in the company and just not working out. So you're very demanding, you give them a clear direction and they're demanding that they achieve that. If they're not achieving that, how do you know when to manage someone out versus when to manage someone into performing in their position?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two ways to answer that. There's the HR answer, which I'm not going to give. Of course, you have to follow all the HR policies and rules in a bigger company. And then there's the way it really works, which is I actually, you mentioned earlier the idea of a performance review, and I actually have a little bit of a rant on performance reviews because to me, performance reviews are always a lagging thing. Like I believe in giving direct feedback constantly, right? And so I can tell you that in my organizations, if someone's not performing to my expectation, they know it immediately. There's no waiting for the 6-month performance review. Now, of course, I have to go through all the HR hoops and whatnot, which, as I mentioned, but generally they have a sense of how they're performing. And if that's an ongoing thing, I would say, in my experience, and unfortunately, I've had to do this my fair share, people will usually manage themselves out, right? If you're being clear and direct with them, where you run into problems is when you're not providing that feedback. Because look, high performing people do not want to be in a position where they can't be successful.
Yeah.
And so it might take time, but they'll ultimately leave on their own typically. Now, there are situations where ultimately I've had to just terminate somebody and you just have to tell them, hey, look, we've tried to fix this. You're not living up to my expectations. We're going to have to go a different direction. And that's when you get into like the HR side of things and follow the rules there. But I've generally found that like people want to be in an environment where they can thrive. And if they realize they're not in an environment where they can thrive, they'll usually pull the plug themselves before I force it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, going back to what you're saying, you're sitting at that dining room table with Masa's son, and you looked around and you're like, these are not actually my people. How do you find your people?
Yeah. Well, some of it is recognizing that we live under this myth that peers at work should be our friends. And for sure, like over my career, there's a handful of people who have crossed over and have become true friends. And you can have a good relationship with people at work, but they would only really be true friends if you were aligned on more than just work, right? And you meet, as you know, like you've been around long enough to know, you meet some people who you click with on multiple levels, and those can become true friends. But what I found was, and this is like it's easier to find your peeps in if you're at a lower level in the organization. When you get into the executive suite, it's actually much harder because you're dealing with a very specific type of person. They're in the C suite for a reason. It's probably because work has dominated their identity for a long time. And just the hard truth, I was telling a friend actually earlier today on a hike that I'll give you a hot take. In my career, I've probably worked with more C-level executives than just about anybody you'll ever talk to. I've just been in the C-level, at that C-level at a bunch of companies for a long time. I could count on one hand the number of people I met who I would say were like genuinely great people, right? And I think that's true of society in general, but especially in the C-suite. So when I say like these are not my peeps, that's what I mean. And on to the contrary, when I got deep into the rock climbing world, I found lots of people who were genuinely great human beings, the type I wanted to hang out with, right? And so I think I always say, when you find your thing, you'll find your
Yeah,
people.
that makes a lot of sense. Yes. How do you work well with people who are not your peeps and yet still have a really strong and productive working relationship?
Right. Because just because we're not personal friends doesn't mean we can't be kick ass together at work. Like it's just different relationships. And we conflate these things. But look, I can name numerous people who I've worked with over my career who we kick ass together. Like we're super symbiotic, super functional together, but they're not my personal friends. I'm friendly with them. I exchange texts with them. I congratulate them when they have big wins, but they're not in my inner circle. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
And
And so like, go
is
ahead.
it a
Sorry.
matter of having certain values overlaps in a professional space, but maybe not sufficient values overlaps in a personal space?
100% at work to do really one thing, which is achieve the objectives of the company, right? That drives our values. Now, there are certain values that transcend everything you do, like kindness, not, being honest, things like that. And trust me, you run into your fair share in the C suite of people who do not check those boxes. And those people are hard to work with. But generally, like people who have been successful in their career, and especially who have made it in the C suite, like they're effective people. If they had a major flaw, they probably wouldn't have risen to that level. And so they're nice enough, their integrity is good enough that we can achieve the objective we've set out to achieve together.
And when you're thinking about obtaining this objective, how do you balance the amount of time you invest in the people in your org as a CMO and the people in other orgs and in the people externally? What are the priorities that you find are important to achieving a marketing objective?
Yeah. Have you ever heard the first team concept?
No, I don't think
Okay,
so.
so I think the first team concept came from Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. He's a business guru. I hope I got that correct. But the first team concept says like you have to know who your first team is. And people, a lot of problems arise from people not knowing who their first team is. So for me as a CMO, my first team is actually not marketing. First and foremost, I'm a member of the executive team who reports to the CEO. My first team and my first duty and responsibility is to the company and the CEO. My second team is marketing. Now, marketing has to align to, the company goals, obviously. That's my role. But for people who are my direct reports, their first team is marketing, right? And so concepts like that make it pretty easy to sort of have clear loyalty, right? Because what happens is what creates a lot of like infighting amongst, for example, executive team members is when they're like, well, marketing wants this, well, sales wants this, well, operations says no. We are the anybody at the C level is on the same team. We are one team, right? Our the needs of our individual organizations come secondary.
That's a great way of thinking about it. And that helps you to avoid building fiefdoms and building empires within the company when actually, no, 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 we're on the leadership team and that's our first team.
Yeah. And by the way, that same concept applies in your personal life, right? Who's your first team? It's your immediate family. People often forget that. Like they'll do things with their friends that compromise the integrity of their family, for example, and that's breaking the first team concept.
That is a powerful concept. In your experience being a CMO, if you look at newer CMOs or maybe even just newer C suite people in general, what are the biggest mistakes that people tend to make in their first 2 to 3 years?
Ooh, the one that comes to mind immediately, by the way, you're asking great questions. I love this. Um, the one that comes to mind immediately, especially for like people who are new at that level, is being too hands on, too in the weeds. It's a little bit of like the irony of leadership is like a lot of times the things that got you into the C suite, which is like being really good at hands on work, will not serve you well in the C suite when the only way to scale is to be a leader of people, right? And so your job, like I used to joke when I was a CMO in big companies that like my role looked more like a politician than an operator. Like, cause my job was to make sure that we had a clear vision and that I was doing all the politicking to make sure we had budget. I was like breaking trail, making sure we had budget and the authority to go do all the cool stuff we want to do. And so um, that a lot of people's career plateaus when things become strategic. I've seen it a bunch of times in my career where you have like a super high performer who all of a sudden gets in a role that is where they have to be really strategic and they don't know how to do that. They struggle with that. And I think it is something that can be learned over time. And like that's where mentoring really helps. But yeah, that's a mistake. I made that mistake. Like when in my early jobs, I love to be involved in get in the weeds and be involved in the details of projects. And that's a horrible idea because it just doesn't scale.
And it is an interesting point that so often in really any career, you become good enough at engineering. Now you become an engineering manager. You become good at marketing. Now you become a marketing manager. And the managing is a fully different skill set. Do you
Completely
think
different.
there's a case to be made for someone to go directly into managing? Or is it, even though it's a weird conversion from doing to managing, it's essential that you have done the doing in the past to manage effectively?
Well, I think I would actually like flip that question a little bit and say, I think maybe the answer to that or the solution to that problem is to make it okay to not be a manager. Like if let's say you're an engineer and you're an incredible software developer,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be, and I think companies like Google have recognized this, right? Like you can become a principal engineer and make a lot of money and have a lot of swagger within the company without ever becoming a manager. I think that's the answer. I think like you should only go into management if you want to and if your skill set leads you there. You shouldn't go just because you think that's the logical next step in a career. But unfortunately, like most companies are not like Google or the more progressive tech companies. There is a sort of a ceiling for individual contributors.
And it's interesting when you think about outcomes. If you're outcomes driven, that can lead you to management because there's a certain ceiling where if you want to scale your impact, you need more firepower, which means more people, which means you need to learn how to manage. Do you think AI changes that by allowing an operator to scale themselves through AI and through automation so effectively that they don't need to manage a team?
Categorically, AI changes everything. So I'll tell you, in the past 3 months, I've gone from not using AI at all to using it constantly throughout the day, hours a day. And it's changing everything. Right now, AI is massive human leverage. Like right now, as a marketer, as a software developer, whatever, it allows one person to do the work of 10 people. And I can tell you, that's absolutely the case in marketing, which is my field. Whether it comes to design, copywriting, you name it, one person can achieve a ton, and agencies are being reshaped as a result of that. I don't know that, the human role in the AI world, I think, goes from being more like an individual contributor to a curator. And like, I know, like in my world, marketing, whereas like, I don't need to have all the ideas anymore. I need to be really good at curating ideas. I need to be a great editor. I need to be a great buyer of ideas, which, for me, that's always been what I enjoyed most about marketing. I've never been the creative, the copywriter, whatever, but I know really great work when I see it. And that's kind of how you work with AI. It's unclear yet. Like, so the next level would be like, AI is not just leverage, it's actually like it is the leader. It is like, and I think we're probably a ways from that happening. I wouldn't say it's not going to happen, or maybe it'll happen sooner than we expect, but you still need that human leadership to bring things together, because AI does hallucinate, right? Still, I think Naval has pointed this out, that like if AI even hallucinates 1 out of 10 times, that's the problem, right? So you still need that
Yeah.
human layer to curate.
I love that vision as a curator because I've thought about it as a manager of AI before. But you're right. I think it's a lot closer to being a curator. You need to have that taste and identify, okay, here are the 5 images generated. That one's best. Let's iterate on that. That's fantastic. If someone's listening to this and they're like, hey, this sounds incredible. I would love for one of my people to become 10 people. How do I start? What are the top like 5 use cases that people are perhaps missing
Yeah.
if they're not using AI today?
Dude, it's crazy. I mean, I still underestimate what AI can do, and like that's why I say, like, in 3 months I've gone from 0 to 100 because it's everything. I mean, like as a at a baseline. So as you know, like I write a lot on X, or used to be called Twitter, and I always took pride in being a pretty good writer and a pretty good editor. Dude, I run everything through two AI engines now. I use Grok and ChatGPT, and it's made me a way better writer. And again, I'm curating, I'm pulling the best. It gives me ideas, and some of them are bad ideas, some of them are great ideas. I pull the best ideas. I used AI recently to create the visual identity, the logo, color palette, and so on for one of my projects. And I did it myself in one day. It's a project I normally would have had to bring in like a designer and pay them $10,000 and let them work for 2 to 4 weeks to do. So now I can do that on myself, and you start learning, you develop skills at writing prompts. Even like,
To zoom in on that one specifically, like what sorts of prompts would you be writing to come up with that visual identity in one day?
yeah, it can really be anything. I'm just continue to be blown away by, like, basically take whatever you have, even if it's in rough form, documents, pictures, writing, and you dump it in and then just ask a question. So I'll give you a very specific example related to this project that I'm working on. So in this case, I had written, with AI's help, I had written like a manifesto of like, I'm working on this project where I'm creating a new type of men's organization, and it'll become a community, and it's starting with this event that I'm hosting in September. But I'd written like this, I don't know, like a 6 paragraph manifesto. I fed that into AI, and I said, develop a logo for this. I want it to look kind of like a national park badge. I want it to have outdoorsy vibes. I want it to feel a little bit vintage. And then it gave me, honestly, like its first response, because I gave a pretty detailed prompt. The first response was like 80% there. And then, you say, well, I like this, but I don't like this about it. And, so you iterate. Um, I have a friend who used AI recently. He owns an agency and he used AI to mock up an entire website to pitch a company on winning their business. And he used Replit, and he told me that it took 700 prompt iterations to get it done over 12 hours. But in 12 hours, he was able to get done what normally would take like a month of a team working on it. So one person, 12 hours, 700 prompts. He accomplished a project that would have taken a month with a team of four.
That's incredible. And I think you hit one of the keys, to me at least, is just starting. You start putting stuff in, you're like, oh, this is terrible. I'm not getting the response I want. You try a different prompt, you try something new, and then you start realizing the power of what it can actually do. Before we run out of time, I want to pivot into a completely different area. You've been very vocal about the importance of health, and you have some really powerful things that I think for a lot of us who spend a tremendous amount of our time sitting down in chairs, it's not so healthy for us. What would you say are the 2 to 3 things that someone who is sitting 12 hours a day should be doing to have more health for a longer period of time?
Yeah, this is another topic we could spend a whole podcast on, and maybe we can. But the first thing I'll say is health is foundational to everything. Like that should be everyone's number one priority because it's the rising tide that floats all boats. You'll perform better in every aspect of life when you're healthier and when you feel better, and you'll literally live longer, be more productive, and so on. So it should be the top priority. But earlier I talked about that sliding scale where like when you're young, you don't have much control over your life, and then over time you gain control. One thing I didn't add that I do believe is the more control you gain, more control of your time, the hugest chunk of that time you win back needs to go into your health, right? The benefit you have when you're young is you can do a lot of bad things and get away with it. I can tell you when you get to be my age, that's not the case. And you're planting the seeds for your 50-year-old self and how you'll feel in your 20s and 30s. So it's an investment you need to make. And so to directly answer your question, like what are the 2 or 3 things to do? For sure, diet's number one. Like we live, Brian Johnson, who is the live the don't die guy, if you know who that is, he has this thing where he says like society is trying to kill us. And it really is true. Like it's not really an exaggeration. Like everything we encounter in society, like our food system's screwed up, our medical system's screwed up. And so the foundation of all of that is like what you put into your body. And so the basics are really simple. Like I happen to believe in a diet that's centered on a variation of the carnivore diet. So like a clean meat centric diet with lots of vegetables, lots of fruits, basically eat whole foods. And then you're 90% of the way there. Exercise is a close second. And the exercise doesn't mean going to the gym 2 or 3 times a week. It means making exercise a huge part of your identity. I think the only way to do that is by finding a sport or a hobby that you really enjoy, because that comes with the community. In my case, it's rock climbing. And then I supplement with mobility and strength training. We were talking before we started recording that I'd recently posted my mobility routine for my back. Spine health is foundational. I wish I'd started doing mobility work in my 20s. Mobility work is really just like, think of it as like movement with resistance, and it increases strength and range of motion of your joints and your spine. That's the number one thing I would invest in if I was your age, because you do that now and you're not going to have spine problems when you're 50 or 60. So that's my top of mind thoughts.
Love that. How many hours a day or minutes a day should be invested in, let's say, mobility when you're in your 30s?
I'd say mobility needs to be 3 to 4 times a week for 30 minutes to 60 minutes. Get a good mobility, and a PT can give you a good mobility training. There's a ton of stuff online. I ran into this guy on Instagram called at low back ability, who really changed the way I think about spine health. So, I mean, there's so much free content online. If you're willing to do the work, you can kind of piece together your own program, try a bunch of things, see what works. But it's like the key to everything is just, it's not so much how much time you're putting in, but being consistent. Right. And so, like, I'd rather see someone have a 15-minute mobility routine that they do 4 times a week than a 2-hour routine that they're sporadically doing.
That reminded me of a really cool quote that I keep going back to, this piece about making these investments early in your career. There's a quote from C.S. Lewis, which I just pulled up. Good and evil both increase at compound interest. That's why the little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The smallest good act today is the capture of a strategic point, which a few months later, you may be able to go on to victories you never dreamt of. And this reminds me of how important these small decisions are, that in everything, business and life, we make a tiny choice today, eat McDonald's, that feels inconsequential. But in 50 years, that actually starts to add up quite dramatically.
Compounding is the key to everything. Compounding is the eighth wonder of the world. Little habits done consistently can move mountains in every area of life, in your career, in your health, in your relationships. All those little decisions you make every day absolutely matter. They do compound. And by the way, compounding works both ways. I mentioned earlier that, of all the people I've worked with in the C suite, there's not that many who I would say are genuinely great people. The other people never set out to become jerks. What happens is you make little compromises that individually seem completely inconsequential. They're easy to justify, but you do that year after year and it compounds into something that you never intended. But
That
it
is
works both
powerful.
ways, right? So good habits done consistently for years. What I've seen, like if I look at my peers from like high school, college, whatever, or actually, here's a great one. When you get to be old like me, Nate, and you go to your 25-year or 30-year high school reunion, you're going to see a huge divide. It is very clear. On one hand, you have the people who have done all the right things and it's compounded over 30 years and they're 50 years old and they look and act and perform like they're 30. On the other hand, you've got people who have not done those things or they've had bad habits and they look, act, and behave like they're 70. And I'm not exaggerating. Like these are people who are literally like, I've got peers from high school who are starting to die from old age because they've had bad habits that have compounded and they're only 54, just like me, but their biological age is 80.
Well, that brings us to the end of the interview, but I do have a lightning round for you. I'll throw out a few quick questions. This is a fun little segment I do at the end, and you can give a quick answer. X or LinkedIn for professional networking?
Oh my gosh. I can't even go on to LinkedIn. Definitely X. X is such a powerful tool. It really is. It's underrated. It's a weird community. But yeah, I can't stomach LinkedIn. I literally don't open the app.
Colorado mountains or Hawaiian beaches?
Well, that's a tough one. Well, as a climber, I bias toward the mountains, but ideally both. But yeah, for sure, mountains for me.
Long form content or short form content?
I'm long winded to my detriment. I only post long form, which has probably kept my audience size relatively small relative to my friends who are great at short engagement content. But it is what it is. I do what I enjoy.
This one's tricky because you really are both in this case, but technical CMOs or creative CMOs?
I'm a creative at heart. I think ultimately technical skills can be hired. What's pretty rare, you know, if you'll allow me to, I'll go on a short
Yeah.
rant about this. So there's a lot of talk, and this comes up on X occasionally, is like people like to downplay idea people, right? Like ideas are nothing, execution is everything. What they don't understand is that the idea has everything to do with the execution. An idea is not good unless it provides a huge advantage in the way that it can be executed. So I kind of think of them as one and the same. And yeah, I'm a huge believer in the best ideas make execution really easy.
Ooh, I love that. It reminds me of a question I come back to every so often, which is what is the thing I could do that would make everything else easier or not important? It's incredible.
Tim Ferriss question. He asks that question a lot.
I think that's
That's
where
a
I stole
really
it from.
important question. Right. Yeah. So like, it's almost like it's elegance is what it comes down to, is an elegant idea has inherent to it an easy path to execution. And ideas that are not elegant, you can work really, really hard and not make a lot of progress.
On that wonderful note, thank you for coming on the interview. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah. I hang out on X. So my handle on X is at Camp4, CAMP and the number 4. That's a reference to climbing. There's a campground in Yosemite National Park that's called Camp 4. It's the original historic climbers campground. And so I snagged that Twitter handle back in 2007 and I've stuck with it. I mean, I love every aspect of climbing. It's a big part of my life, and the history, the act of climbing itself, the community, the spiritual component to it. Yeah, and for that reason, whether it's climbing or something else, I'll leave you with a hot take, which is I don't think it's possible to have a truly happy, fulfilling life if you don't find your thing. And it's got to be something that's uniquely yours. We all love our families. We all want to do great at in our careers, but you got to have that other thing that you do for the simple joy of it. Find that thing, you'll find your community and you'll find fulfillment.
Facts. Well, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate you coming on the show.
You bet. This was fun.